Tom Robertson is a vital aspect of the Focus program in various ways. In this video, he explains the ins and outs of conducting focus groups within the Focus program. Let's watch it as he explains.
One of the things you've heard Sue talk about earlier is needs assessments. How many of y'all heard of needs assessments? Why do we do needs assessments? My dad always told me you can't teach what you don't know any more than you can come back from where you've never been. And too often we try to do that without doing the needs assessment. And the needs assessment tells me, one, we always say, well, that tells us what they don't know. Well, yeah, it does. But it also tells us what they do. What do they know? To me, I always tell people that the thing about the Focus program is that we kind of catch kids in a random act of responsibility. They're good kids. They do good things. We just never catch them at it. We catch them doing the other things. And so one of the things we have to do is we have to figure out, how do we get that information? How do we find out what the kids know? How do we find out what the kids are doing? How do we find out that information so that we can adapt our programs to meet those needs? And how many of you have kids? How many have ever had someone that doesn't have a child tell you how to raise yours? And how does that make you feel? We do that to young people all the time. We come up with these great programs, but we never got input. We never asked them. And we've talked about Facebook. How many of y'all are on Facebook? How many of you are on Twitter? How many are on Snapchat? How many are on Grindr? Tinder? Jacked? Those are all hookup apps that kids today are starting. My grandsons were here. Both of them had friends up. Both of them, one was 17, one was 19, found their girlfriends on Tinder. Because that's the way they do it. We have to adapt that. We have to find out where they are. We have to meet them where they are. And one of the things we have to do is we have to get that information. And one of the things that we found very, very helpful is called a focus group. How many have ever taken part of a focus group? It's a marketing tool. Focus groups were designed as marketing tools. They were designed so that if I'm coming up with a new soft drink, I pull a bunch of people together and I say, let's talk about this. What did you like about the old soft drink? What would you like about the new soft drink? What would you do? We find those questions and we have them answer them among a group of their peers. Because if I set a bunch of young people down in a circle and ask them these questions, what are they going to tell me? They're going to tell me exactly what they think I want to hear. If I train young people to sit these people down and say, listen, this is anonymous. Like if we did a focus group today and I said, I'm going to pick on this row right here and we're going to do a focus group today and I'm not going to tell you, boss, and I don't know who you are and I don't even know where you teach. Are you going to tell me valid information? Yeah, because I have no recourse at your job to say, let me tell you what they said. That's what focus groups do, is we sit down and we come up with a group of questions and we sit young people down and we train young people to do the focus group leadership role, where they sit down and they learn, how do I involve the whole group? How do I make sure that you don't that you don't monopolize the conversation? How can I get your input there? How can I make sure that you feel comfortable? Those are skills that we all need to succeed in life. And what the focus group process does is it lets those students develop those. But it also lets those students who are not comfortable being the leaders take part, because we also need the report. How many of y'all have friends that are lawyers? What are they, first thing they tell you? If it's not written down, it did not happen. Same thing happens with focus group. You can do the world's greatest focus group, but if I don't have a report, then I don't have a report. So what is a focus group? Small gathering of deliberately selected people who participate in a planned discussion that's intended to elicit perceptions and knowledge. pretty much, it's a group of people. How many people do we put in a focus group? 30? How many? Y'all tell me. Smaller groups. Why smaller groups? Because everybody can talk. And if it's more than 6, 8, 10 people, it's a lecture. Okay, so we talk about the number involved. We talk about a moderator. It has to be somebody that has pretty good people skills. Can we teach people skills? We can develop people skills. Prepared questions. I have to have the questions because I'm the one that needs the information. So I need to have questions. Can we do them on HIV/AIDS? Do it all the time. We've also done focus groups on violence, on Sue, my favorite one at Jacksonville High School, our focus kids did a focus groups to the whole school on why don't y'all come to the dances after the football games? Because that was an important thing, and they told us exactly why. You have to have an observer, you have to have a note taker. This one's important, the note taker, because that's what gives me the information. Because before I can come into your superintendent and say, let me tell you what the students in this school want to know, I have to know. And so the facilitator is important, the note taker is important, okay? Produce a lot of information quickly. We're going to do some focus group training today. That's not going to be really hard. It's less costly than written surveys. It's also a lot easier to do because I don't just, if I do surveys, I get a lot of numbers. But does that tell me what people think? Does it tell me what people feel? No, it just tells me numbers. And so it lets us get a lot of different information. It's easily managed. It's good because some people don't read. So this is a way for them to be, because if I walk in with a survey and I hand it out and you have problems reading, what are you going to do to that survey? You're just going to start, you're not going, because you're concerned about that. We did a focus group of special needs kids. And that was really interesting because it was the first time anybody ever asked them. Because they could read. But they had a lot of good information. They had a lot of good people. One of the interesting things people say, when should you start teaching? You know what this group told me? Young Down syndrome in the back said, you should start teaching when we start asking. So that's what we have to talk about. It's good follow-up for questioning. Well, kids love this because they get to talk. And they get to talk with each other. And it may be that they get to talk for the first time in their life. Somebody's asked them their opinion. Because we talk all the time about it's not just the people that have always been labeled as leaders that can lead. And sometimes when you start doing focus groups, you find out that there are some people that can lead that were just never asked before. It becomes an empowering. That's a word that we use way too often. But it really does empower a person to make a difference when they've never been asked to make a difference before. If I'm going to do Goths, who do I need to lead that group? If I'm going to do we have to be really conscious of that, depending on the information we're getting. And it has something to do with focus groups, but one of the neatest things that happened to Sue and I at Jacksonville High School is a cheerleader came up after this whole focus group process. And her words were, I made friends that I never would have made before. Because I never would have sit and talked to them about this before. Because they weren't in my group before. And so what this does is it puts us all in the same group. So when we're sitting around talking, I might be the leader, you might be the reporter. On the next question, you might be the leader and you might be the reporter. We can change these roles and we can make sure that people can participate. What's the next one? Disadvantages. If I get a bunch of people who sit together in class, what happens with that first one? they go, well, that's what I think too. Which is why we try to use open-ended questions. We don't try to use the, what do you, we try to do those kinds of things. They may be shy. I was one of those shy kids. And so we may have to encourage them to become involved. The moderator could be easily influenced by participants. Yeah, if you've got a strong person in that group, somebody has to be pretty strong to kind of buffer that. This one, the socially accepted responses rather than what they believe. That's what you have to guard against. Because they're going to tell you, or you're going to read into their responses what you want to see. And you have to guard against that. And we have to make sure that they're telling us what they really think, not just what we want to hear. Because if I say, boy, did y'all like this? And y'all will go, yeah, that's because y'all think I'm going to let you out early for lunch. I know why y'all are going to do that. But if we sit and talk about what we got out of this, I'll get a lot more information. I have a lot of people, I'm still waiting on a report from 2015 that they never sent in. So did that focus group happen? No. So all that information was lost. The reporting is vital. For the next 15 or 20 minutes, we're going to talk a little more about focus groups. And then what I'm going to do is we're going to actually break up into groups and we're going to practice. And I think just to go back over what we went over earlier, it's very, very important when we start talking about this is why do we want the information? Why is it important? Well, right now, when we're starting to look at how do we change behaviors, we have to get a lot of information on that. So this is pretty standard when we determine the purpose. Who's interested in the results? It depends on who I'm going to give the results to. What questions do I ask, or what questions are asked? Again, that has to do with those of us trying to get the information. I try not to use closed-ended questions. I try to use open-ended questions so that we get some feedback. Who will participate? Where will it be held? When will it be held? I found that in schools, they're a lot happier to do focus groups if I'm getting them out of class to do it. So I don't schedule it at lunch. I don't schedule it at PE, those kinds of things. Who will conduct the focus group? You will determine that. Will there be incentives? The biggest incentives, you're out of class. Now, when I work with adults, we have to talk about a lot of other things like that because sometimes I'm asking people to take off work and to give up time and those kinds of things. But with our students, the incentive is we've asked them to help and they're not having to study. That's pretty much when you're 15, I'm cool with that. All right? We usually do a two-person team. When we break up and we start doing focus groups, we usually have two groups. We have a leader, and then I have kind of a backup leader, and then I have a note taker. So I actually end up with like three. I can get by with two. I can have a note taker and a leader, but sometimes it's a little easier on that leader if I have somebody that has their back. So that if I'm talking and I get stuck, then Elizabeth can say, well, have you thought about this? And kind of you do that tag team approach right there. We talked earlier, we try to have 6 to 10 people in each group. I like to do 3 to 5 different groups so that I have something to compare. If I do a focus group in your school and I only have 10 students, does that speak for the whole school? Maybe, maybe not. It depends. So we try to get a representative, 3 to 5 different schools or groups. I always ask every group the same questions because I want to be able to compare each group's response to exactly the same questions. If I ask you one question and I ask you one question, you may give me great answers, but I can't compare them. And so if I have 5 groups answering the same questions, it gives me a pretty good idea about what the whole group thinks. Gather needed supplies, set up area to conduct the session. I found this is really helpful because if I have it set up beforehand, they think it's important. If it's ready when they walk in, then they're the star. If I'm kind of going half here and half there and say, well, sit right there, and then it's not as important. And I'm going to put y'all in the situation. If I walk in, I have 5 tables. Every table has 10 things. There's a tape recorder if I want it. There's, and young people don't even know what a tape recorder is, but they'll ask, what's that thing in the middle of the table? But if I have pens, I have pencils, I have everything else, and y'all walk in and see that, then you know we're here to work and you know you're the star. And that's what becomes really important, okay? This one, the second one, y'all are teachers. Did we get more comfortable in a circle, or do we get more comfortable in a lecture setting? Sir, why? Closed setting, more personal. And it goes back to King Arthur and the round table. If we're in a circle, there's nobody at the head of the table. There's no one person more important than anybody else in the circle. And it's just a lot, because we're looking at each other. And you're not looking at the back of my head, you're looking at my face. And you're looking at how I answer the questions and those kinds of things. So I sit down with a group. I go over the purpose of the meeting. I go over how we're going to proceed. No cell phones. That's the first thing I have to talk. You know, we're here, everything off. We're going to sit here. We're going to work. Ask an opening question. What would be a good opening question for a group of focus group participants? Because y'all think about it, because we're getting ready to do one. So if I came in and said, thank y'all for coming today, what do you know about a focus group? You go, nothing. Well, let me tell you about a focus group. Let me tell you why we're here. Let me tell you what we're trying to accomplish. Let me kind of do those kinds of things. This one, make sure all opinions on a question are heard. Ask an opening question. Can be the one we've decided on or not. With me, I kind of like to start with just a general question on what do you know, why are we here, then we get into the meat of the thing. But every time we ask a question, make sure we get opinions from everyone in the group about that question. Because if we don't, it's not valid. So if I'm doing a focus group and you answer it, and you answer it, and you don't, and I don't ask you about it, what do you think about your importance in the group? You don't matter because I didn't care. So this is a biggie, and especially with young people, and probably as a focus group leader, that's the hardest skill to have, is to make everyone comfortable. Okay? I need a moderator and a facilitator. I introduce, I'm going to pick on Elizabeth. You're my facilitator. And yours, see, I could say want the.
Oh, I've heard that before.
I know, I figured you had.
Onitha.
Onitha. See, I'm picking on her. So if I say, Onitha, I want you to be my facilitator, and you're going to lead it. Guys, this is Elizabeth. She's going to be my reporter. She's going to write down everything we say, but don't worry, she's not going to write your name down. We're not going to know. What we talk about stays here. So this is Elizabeth. She's going to be our recorder. It's important. She has a vital role because you're going to tell us what happens. This is Onithia. She's going to lead us in the focus group, and so I'm going to turn it over to you. Now we start. We come up with our first question. Ask the question, guide this conversation, listen. My dad said, I always quote my father a lot. My dad said, the mark of a good listener is somebody that can listen to your story without being reminded of one of their own. So, I mean, think about that. If I'm being reminded of a story, I'm not listening to you. So I try in this, I want to listen, I want to be that person that doesn't have a story to tell, because then I'm listening to you. So listen. You could have a laptop or notebook. Demographics. I always like to know demographics. Why is that important when I'm doing a focus group? Why is it important that I know how many people were here, how many male, how many female, what are the ages, what are the races? Why is that important when I'm doing a focus group? Because I want to make sure everybody is represented. And if I don't have that information, I don't know. And so when I'm doing a focus group, if I were doing a focus group right here, I would say I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I have 9 females, ages 18 to 23. In Montgomery, Alabama, July 11th, 2017. That tells me what this group is. 3 African American, 6 Caucasian. Now we start recording. That's why it's important. Body language. I always hate it when somebody's talking to me like this. Because are they listening? Probably not. Probably not. And so we have to be conscious of our body language. We have to be conscious of what we're trying to do. And what we have to be conscious of is that everyone in this focus group is important and has something that we want to hear. And so that's what we have to talk about. And it goes back to, we always label people. Y'all are in the public schools. Y'all are in, I mean, we're not always, this is a jock, and this is a dweeb, and this is a this, and this is a that, and this is a rah-rah, and this. We're always labeling these people, and sometimes we forget that they're people and that they have input. But we're too busy kind of labeling this and labeling that, and sometimes nobody ever asks. And what I try to do, again, quote my dad says, when you're trying to get something from somebody, show up with more than a handful of gimme. I'm not here for you to give me something. I'm here to give you something. And what that is value. And I give you value by honoring whatever you say. There are no right answers. There are no wrong answers. There are no opinions. I don't use a focus group to correct knowledge. If somebody says, well, boy, you can get HIV from sitting on a toilet seat. Well, now's not the time for me to lecture you about that. Now's the time for me to say, well, you know, I've heard that, and it may or may not be true. We'll talk about that later. But when I write up the report, it's important that I say, some of the people thought you could catch HIV from a toilet seat. That's what's important, not to correct her, but to acknowledge that that's what she thought. And now now as we develop our approach, we'll answer those questions. What else did I have up here? Is that it? Oh, we talked about this. I found that with a recorder, most older people won't talk if there's any kind of recording device in front of you, but kids will yabber forever if they think you're recording them. So sometimes we can use that as a means to get them to open up. But again, we have to talk about the confidentiality. What's here stays here. Make sure this, and then I always try to debrief the research team. So what I want to do after the focus group is to sit down and go, Nathan, what'd you think about it? How could we have done it better? Did you feel comfortable? Is there any questions you would have asked? Elizabeth, how did you feel about doing the reporting? Were you comfortable with the reporting? Would you have liked it if I had a recorder, or did I give you enough stuff? And if we did this again, would you be willing to be the reporter again, or would you rather be the leader, and would you be willing to be a recorder? Because it can change. It can change, okay? These y'all all know. These are just the ways we get along with people. Okay? When we start talking about analyzing it, transcribe it immediately. And now, y'all may be a lot different than me, but if I write up what we talked about today, there's a good idea. I mean, I have a pretty good idea that it's going to be in there. If I wait till next Thursday, I'm not going to remember what to say. So I need to write it up as quickly as possible. List keywords and phrases. You know, we did this, folks, today, and I kept hearing prevention. I kept hearing abstinence. I kept hearing substance abuse. List those words, those key words that we keep hearing over and over and over again. And then summarize your insight. That's where it gets fun, because that's when you get to look at it and go, okay, that's what they were talking about. Because you learn a lot when you do a focus group. And when I read those reports, I learn a lot. See, my reporter, I knew it.
Well, it's after lunch. When you're doing the transcribing, are we talking about the scriber or?
You're my reporter.
Okay.
Your job.
I've written it.
You have written it down.
And
Now you put it in the format, and we're going to talk about the format. You put it in the report format and submit it to the person that requested the focus group.
Okay, so the summary is going to be my thoughts.
It's going to be what you think.
Okay.
And what we'll do is sit down and say, is that about what you heard? Because that's part of that debriefing. Okay? Here we talked essay form, paragraphs, use quotations. Always include the number in the group, where it was, the age group, the setting, those kinds of things. And it doesn't do me any good to go, the answer to the first question, 4 people said yes, 2 people said no. The answer to the second question, 8 people said maybe, 2 people. I need the paragraphs, I need the words.